In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. I am thrilled to speak with today's guest. He's a serial entrepreneur, now on his fourth venture after growing his last company in the cybersecurity space to 8 figures and driving over 300% growth in its final year, ultimately leading the organization through to a successful acquisition, all while bootstrapping the firm. He's lived in 7 countries across 3 continents and has a passion for working with foreign-born entrepreneurs to create positive impact in the global entrepreneurial ecosystem, a mission that really resonates with me. He also uses his expertise to coach founders and other executives in building resilience, managing burnout, and fostering meaningful relationships. And he recently founded a brand new startup that is currently in stealth mode. Please welcome Lior Klisman to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you, Lior, and there are so many topics I'd love to get into with you. I wanted to start really by talking about, we're talking about driving change and transformation. So I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the biggest misconception out there about driving major transformation in an organization?
At least for me, the biggest misconception of leadership or driving transformation, that is, was you have to have your hands in every part of the company. You need to micromanage your team. You need to squeeze every ounce of productivity and constantly be on top of everything. Make sure that everyone is doing what they need to do. And you have to look at the business with a magnifying glass. I found that to be one of the biggest misconceptions. And the reason for those misconceptions is, at least for how I saw it while running few businesses by now, was people want to feel seen, heard, and empowered. And people cannot be feeling seen, heard, and empowered with a magnifying glass. It's just not working. We want to be autonomous. We want to feel trusted. And we want to make sure that we're allowed to make mistakes as well, because mistakes are inevitable. We're human beings. We're not human doings. And so much of the misconception goes to my last statement. We're human beings. We're not human doings. Sometimes we see ourselves as a doing creatures that always need to do instead of be. Now, I'm not saying, when I'm saying be, is like, let's sit with our legs on our table and have a fun time, but there needs to be some sort of fun in an organization. To drive change, there needs to be a certain level of trust between the leader and their team to create and to get them from point A to point B, to the desired outcomes of the organization, to the desired outcomes of the team. And that happens usually when you put trust in your people, when you create enough trainings and resources for the people who are working with you, not for you, with you. And when you're there to guide and not manage. Most people do not want to be managed. They want to be guided. They want to understand the why behind the decisions that the organization is making. Not all the way from the helm, but at least from their team, to understand, why are we doing X versus Y? For example, that's the best way to put it.
Yep.
Once you allow that autonomous, and once you explain the reasoning behind the why, once you give them enough resources and training, have the trust to let them be autonomous, to let them flourish, to let them bring their own true colors. Because you never know, in the end of the day, if you're putting somebody in a box, you never know what they can be outside of that box. And that's where the true magic happens, outside of the box. So that's, I think, the biggest misconception that I've experienced and that I see often in organization. micromanagement.
Yep. I think that's a really important one. And I want to start, I have a few areas I want to get into here with you, but I want to start by asking, like, where did you learn this lesson? Is it something you learned kind of directly in your experience? And is that something you could talk about?
Unfortunately, I have learned it in my experience. I'm not proud of it, but I have learned. I used to work for somebody. Seems like a past lifetime ago, but the person who owned the company was a great mentor for me. Not just the mentor of a one-on-one, but seeing what was done wrongly and seeing what was done right, and taking what was done well and living out what was done not so well. There was a lot of micromanagement. Everybody always had specific things that they needed to do. The leadership would come constantly to check on if things were get done. There was zero trust. It was like, you need to do what you need to do, and we're going to make sure that you do it. And we're not going to trust, we're going to also review anything and everything that you do. So I've experienced on my own skin. And when I opened my first company, falsely, I thought that's the way to run a successful business. And I put parenthesizing on the falsely, because then I became a micromanager and I wanted to make sure my hands are on everything and I have a magnifying glass on anybody and that I'm in control. It's my company, my direction, my ship. Everybody does as I say so. And then quickly I realized that I'm not connecting to some of the people that are working with me, that there is a big friction in how the productivity is going. I want more productivity, yet I'm getting less productivity. Now, looking in retrospect, I understand why. People didn't feel empowered. I wasn't a leader, I was a manager. So I did experience it on my own skin and kind of implemented that in my first business, which didn't go very well. And then I decided, hey, let's make a change within myself. Went to do a lot of personal growth and a lot of leadership development. And that's when I realized that there's so much more than to just manage. And what's really the difference between managers and leaders.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious to ask you, like, what had to change when you moved away from that, whether in that same example or just for subsequent ventures? What were the things that you had to put in place to kind of empower the team and build that trust? Can you talk through that a little bit?
I think the first and foremost was my own trust, my own limiting beliefs. My limiting belief that if I'm not in control, the company is not going to go anywhere. I think that would be the first and foremost thing that I had to work on. So in short, I had to work on myself. I cannot empower change with other people if I'm not empowering the change within myself. And I think it goes to every area in our life, personal or professional. So first you want to look at the mirror, which I really had to face the mirror. Take a look, what can I change first within myself, that then the people who are working with me can see the change that I've done, and maybe they can change as well. Not that they were doing something wrong, but once you see someone grows and change, it's encouraging. It's empowering. It's enlightening to see another person, a person that used to be that way, now they're this way, and for the good. It's really encouraging. You're like, huh, what did he do or what did she do? I want to do the same. So once I worked on myself first, then I was able to kind of let go, to implement more trust, to give people those, as I said earlier, that training and resources, and to let them experience what they needed to experience with the understanding that it's okay to make mistakes. I've had my own fair share of mistakes. Now it's a time where I can allow their mistakes to happen, because yes, there is something to say that if you make a mistake twice, three times, four times, there might be a problem that we need to talk about. But one or two mistakes, you learn from them. So once you get out of the bad connotation that failure or mistakes have and see it as a learning opportunity for development and growth, that's where people feeling more empowered that They don't think that if they do the silliest of mistakes, they're going to get in trouble, but otherwise be encouraged. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss what went well, what didn't go so well. And let's implement X and Y in different examples to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then again, giving them autonomy to really be outside of the box, not to limit them. Now I understand that I want to have people, I care about the persona more than the technical skills or their expertise or their skill set. That's things that can be taught. Persona, I can teach someone to want to come here or to be a great human being, something that no organization can really educate. But if you are bringing people who are in that mindset, you could direct them to be better at what they do, to grow, to really love what they're doing if they understand the reason of what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Yeah, yeah. You're making me think really like about my own kind of leadership and evolution of that. So as you're talking, I'm thinking about um right, some of the things that I've gotten in place in our business over the years. And I think there is a level of kind of foundational things to have in place to enable that kind of environment, right? Like having the right leadership team in place, having some processes kind of documented so that everyone understands what are the expectations, which I think goes back to kind of the training that you're talking about. And then I think that having some longevity of certain members of the team so that people are comfortable and understand the CEO and founder's leadership style, like the dynamics on the team, which I think goes back to the culture, but that it's okay to make mistakes. I won't get fired if I make this mistake, because otherwise people are operating from a place of fear and not from a place, as you said, of trying to drive innovation and thinking outside the box. And any idea is a good idea as long as you're kind of vetting it and kind of following the right process.
That's right. It would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Kind of it would work, and I'm sure you and our listeners are wondering, wow, how would our organization be so great and how we would love to work here? Shall those have occurred in our organization? Because clearly not every organization works that way. Uh, but I'm sure a lot of wondering what it could look like on the other side. And that's some questions that I started asking myself. And that's what brought me the desire to change and to make things better for myself and my organizations.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're kind of touching on this topic of like personal transformation as a leader, which I think is such a important one, of being able to, like you said, look in the mirror, both for yourself and then having the people around you that are kind of will tell you kind of how you come across, kind of what they view of that. So curious, like how do you think like leaders should look at this if they want to kind of get a better kind of true sense of how they show up, how their team feels about them? Are there kind of methods that you would recommend or that you find most helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I'm hearing your question, the first thing that came to mind is a quote by a very smart person. His name is Alvin Toffler. He calls himself a futurist. I'm not sure what that really means. Talks a lot about the future of work and the future of humanity. And one of his famous quotes goes, and it says, "The illiterate of the future will not be the person who does not know how to read. It will be the person who does not know how to learn." And I think it's so true. And then he sums it up and he says, learning, unlearning, relearning. And I think that's the best thing to think about as leaders. We learned a thing or two, but we must be willing to unlearn the things that we have learned and relearn something new. And that constant evolution of learning, unlearning, relearning is, I think, the best way to think about driving transformation within yourself first and for others. Understanding that what you're used to in the past, what you've learned in the past, might no longer serve you moving forward. And if it's no longer serving you moving forward, then what is it that will? So for me, I started reading a lot of books about leadership. I started doing some workshops, communication workshops, personal development workshops. I started to breathe. I know it sounds weird, but I started to like take a second and breathe So moving between being reactive to proactive. Famous Viktor Frankl has it in his quote that there is a space between stimulus and a response. I used to not work in that space at all. I had stimulus, I had a response. But within that space between the stimulus and the response is where we can really make clear decisions so we can be proactive and not just reactive, because in the end of the day, we decide how we want to react. So are we reacting from a stimulus, or are we being proactive and taking a second to breathe before we do something that might be not us, it's just a pattern of us or an old residue of something else that we were taught that no longer serves us. I think that personal development is first wanting to change, to grow. I think us as humans, we always want to grow. And I'm not saying grow in just our bank accounts or our lives or our roles or have a better house or a better car, but grow as humans. I want to learn more things. I want to be able to realize things that I haven't realized before, right? And I want to see how I can, with my growth, empower others to do the same. For example, in the past, I used to raise my voice a lot for some weird reason, because that's what I've experienced. I thought that makes people realize what they need to do. Couldn't be further from the truth. It's disempowering. It disempowered me, let alone the people that I worked with. So once that realization, I learned what I've learned. I've unlearned that. Like, I don't need to do that anymore. It does not serve me and it does not serve anybody else. What can I relearn? So I can relearn patience. I can relearn compassion. I can relearn acceptance. I can relearn listening. I think one of the most important things is to listen. Do we hear or do we listen? And I think there's so much strength in listening to the people you work with, is listening to your intimate relationship, is listening when you go outside and with your friends. There's so much more information you can take in when you really are receptive to more things, when your awareness extends and you're really listening. There's so much more new information that otherwise you would distort, delete, or generalize. That's usually what we do.
Yep. I love so much of what you shared there. And I think that journey of self-awareness, and it sounds almost like putting kind of a roadmap in place of being very conscious of what are the areas I want to change. And then, like you said, any habit, you need to change it, replace it with someone, right? Not just remove it, but what are you replacing the habit you want to get rid of or trade with what you're moving towards? Yeah.
It's mainly our behaviors. There's never something wrong with the person. It's usually the behavior. And I know it for myself. I wasn't a bad person. I was full of heart and I wanted the best for them, but my behaviors did not indicate the same as who I was. So once you can change the behavior is where other things starts to change and there is more realization.
Right. And Lior, so we're talking about kind of the personal transformation and kind of how that helps to drive organizational change. I'd love to maybe go into an example of an organizational change that you've driven. Is there kind of what's like the biggest or kind of most impactful change? And can you talk a little bit about how that unfolded for you?
Yes, absolutely. The biggest change that I've had in the business, and I've touched about it a bit earlier in our conversation, was that mindset and letting people be more autonomous. Because when I started, especially my last business that got acquired, in the beginning, I had so much limiting belief that it's going to succeed. Am I doing the right thing? Am I a leader? Why do people even want to work with me? Why would clients want to work with me? And once I was able to change myself to the things that we talked about, I started seeing people being way more encouraged and people going outside of the box and achieving things that I never thought were possible, not for them, but for our business. I started seeing this magic all of a sudden happens when I started listening to their ideas instead of being like, my way is that or the highway. I started seeing so much changes started to happen. We grew. People wanted to come. People shared their ideas with me. So that's one of the biggest organizational changes that if I look at the first 2 years compared to the remaining years until we got acquired, which was like 4.5 years, wow, it was almost like a different company. I was different. They were different. People felt encouraged. People felt seen. It was really important for us. And another organizational change that made a huge difference is not having meetings for the sake of meetings. And that's something I coach a lot of founders about. People want to have daily stand-ups, monthly all hands, quarterly all hands. And the stand-ups are full team of, every single day. They come and the full team discuss what's the goals and KPIs or objectives that we have as a company for that week. Yet you do it every single day. And once I moved away from, we don't need the meetings for the sake of meetings, I much prefer to work one-on-ones. And I had an organization that in the earlier days, it was still a small team. I could do one-on-ones with everyone. Obviously, as you're growing and you have way more team members, then you will do it in the teams. So each team will have their team leader that will talk one-on-ones with the team. So it can, scale down. Even if you're scaling up, you can still have those if you start to do it by teams. But not having just meetings for the sake of meetings. Because a lot of times, and that goes to all of us, if we're in a stand-up or a meeting where everybody is there, a lot of us will be a bit nervous or concerned to show our thoughts, to show our emotions. And it can be good and bad, meaning somebody might need some help and they'll be shy to ask for it because maybe others don't need that help. And now they're worried that others will see them as not good enough. It's their own limiting beliefs. And it can be on the other hand, where someone is doing so good, but yet doesn't want to show off. There is also the third person, somebody is doing so good and really wants to show off next to everybody. Once you take that away and you can speak one-on-one with people, they're feeling more encouraged to really share what's going on for them. And then you can really see them, listen to them, and help them overgrow, achieve that desirable outcome that they have and get your team from point A to point B. So I think that's the biggest organizational transformation that I've had in my businesses and that I see when others implement in their businesses, the huge success in results that they're having.
And how do you kind of harness those ideas? So you kind of go through it, you create the change in yourself, you create the organizational change, and then you are getting, like you said, good ideas from different people in the organization. Do you have any kind of frameworks for how to vet that, how to help people kind of make autonomous decisions? Can you speak to kind of either or both of those areas?
Yeah, I think when you vet decisions, because sometimes I did not agree with their ideas, and that's okay. But once they were able to at least feel that I'm listening to their decision and taking them in consideration, and then say, you know what, might be a great idea. However, I do think that we should do it that way. And the reason I want to do it that way is because ABC. So once I was able to take what they said, hear it, even paraphrase it back to them, and say, you know what, we can take a small thing from it, but I really think that we should do it that way, and explain the why again, as we talked earlier, behind the decision, people didn't feel disencouraged because I still listened to them. I might not have accepted all their ideas, but I've listened to them. I gave them the time and I explained why we're not going to do it this way in a
Yep.
very compassionate way. So, and I've always made it clear that I will hear everything, but not necessarily everything will get accepted. So it is by setting expectations, clear expectations, and authentically communicating, authentic and effective communication, that they don't feel, okay, oh my God, we've had this idea. We want, the leader wants us to bring the idea, but they're not implementing anything. No, we're not implementing, but we'll explain the why.
Yeah. And I'm curious, like on the flip side of that, are there any examples where you had kind of an idea unexpectedly came from somewhere or someone that kind of made a big difference that you could speak to?
Absolutely. It's hard to think about like a specific example because it happened quite a few times. Uh, for example, the first thing that's come to my mind was one of our team managers had an idea of how the team is going to support some of the clients. And we didn't think about that before. So it was pretty much taking a broader team, making that broader team into 3 or 4 different teams that will have more focused attention on specific types of personas and clients, depending where they are geographically, size, and all that. That we didn't think about it. We were like, we should have one larger team supporting the clients, and the team knows who they're supporting in some way. Once we've took the change and implemented that, we saw that we're not only doing better as a company, that everyone knows even more what they need to do and way more focused, that clients felt that we're giving them more focused attention, that we were able to get clients now to make changes faster because it was the same people that they're working with. They knew the people, they've gained trust in them, and it wasn't always someone else. So that's the first thing that came to my mind, for example, that we changed. Another example was creating a customer success. We've kind of had customer success team implemented in the broader team. And once we decided by somebody, it wasn't our idea. Somebody came, brought that idea, and thank goodness for her for bringing that idea. And her question was, what if? And I love what if questions. I absolutely love what if questions. They're usually great, aren't they? And she said, what if we take a small part of the team we created that's solely there not to support the clients, but to look at what can we do as a company to make sure we give them better support, but also how can we bring on new clients and kind of get them embedded closer to the team. And we said, that makes sense. We love that. We couldn't do it right then and there when that person brought the ask per se. But we did say, all right, we love this. Let us set a goal or objective, call it what you will, that in the next quarter, let's start working about it. Let's put it in writing, have some trainings around it. Let's see what resources those teams will need. And by next quarter, let's implement that. Next quarter came, we implemented that. Ever since then, we've had that team, which we've grown. So it's those things that sometimes you don't think about yourself, because a lot of times being in leadership, it gets, there's a reason it says it gets lonely up top, or it can feel lonely at the helm. And those people bringing their ideas, if I was in my mindset, it's my way or the highway, I would not have even listened to it. I might have listened to it, but everything would have come out this year and left to the other year. It's cool, we'll do it maybe at some point. Really listening and understanding and giving that person the stage to really explain to us what she was envisioning, we said to ourselves, wow, we can believe that we didn't think about it before. Maybe we were too much in the business instead of on the business. And that person really took a step back from the fog and now saw that it can be done in a better way. Let's
Right.
go. Let's do it. So they
Yeah. Yeah.
empowered everyone. It feels encouraged. It worked for the best. And some ideas that we took didn't go so well. So there is the other side of the coin, but it's a learning, again, it's a learning experience.
Right. Well, and what I love about those examples, and you kind of touched on this, is it's people that were in the business that were working in those areas day to day. So they kind of inherently have a different view than someone kind of leading that function, leading the organization. And I know from my experience, that's always like so rewarding as a founder. So when we are in times like this, when things are always changing and you can't really afford as a business to not be innovating and changing and trying new things, I think it just kind of underscores the importance of making sure everyone kind of feels that empowerment that you were talking about earlier to make those suggestions and look for places to improve and do things differently.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Leo, I appreciate all the insights that you're sharing, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and who's the man behind these insights. So can you tell me a little bit about kind of your background, your childhood? Like how did you get to where you are today?
Sure. Uh, my childhood was an interesting one. So I come from Israel originally, born and raised in Tel Aviv. Uh, come from the lower middle socioeconomic class. So there's a lot of conversation around debt and security around the dinner table, if you will. However, the majority of my parents' friends were quite successful. They all had small businesses, brick and mortar, mom and pop shops, and were all quite successful. So it's a very little age. I constantly was fascinated by, maybe fascinated is not the right word back then because I think I disliked it a lot in my early childhood, but the fact that they could afford and we couldn't. Why could they have and we not, and we don't? It's questions that have driven me to, I think if I connected that to a lot of my entrepreneurship skills. uh, my mom was working for the government, so we've lived in a couple of places outside of Israel. But before that, I started realizing that I don't want the same life that they had. I want the life that their friends had. No, it's a bad pattern to start to attach to as a kid. I want to be them. I don't want to be me. Not a great pattern. However, that led me into working at a very young age because I was so curious of what it would feel like to make my own money, what it would feel like to work, what started preparing myself without even knowing to where I am today. My first business was at 12 years old. I sold pretzels, or we call them in Israel bagels, not really pretzels, outside of soccer stadiums with family friends without my parents really knowing about it. Because I would go to games. I was a big fan of one team. So I would go to games very, very early, stay very late. And with that family friends, I had my own kind of cart that I would sell the bagels before and after the game. So I was able to go to the game. I would sell before and after. And I saw my little saving bucks grow a little bit more. I would buy the product for him. He would give me the product. We would share 50-50 after the cost. So by no means have I made a lot of money, but back then it looks like I'm making a lot of money, if you know what I'm saying. It felt really good. And I've never stopped building ever since. At the age of 16, I had me and my best friend imported a clothing business into Israel. Glorious failure. It never really took off. We started then giving those t-shirts to all of our friends for free. Like, just use them. I might as well. We're not going to throw it. Might as well give it. I'm pretty sure either me or him, somewhere in our parents' basement, somewhere, still some of those t-shirts laying around. I haven't checked on it. Uh, so that was my childhood. I also became a technology lover. I got my first computer. Now, mind you, as we came from that type of socioeconomic, my parents had to save quite a lot to get me my first computer. The first day it came, I broke it apart and put it back together. I remember my parents' faces were shocked. They just spent all this money and here their kid is just breaking it all down.
Yeah, you needed to know how it worked. Was that what was behind it?
Exactly. I was fascinated by like, okay, how does this thing operate? And it took me a while to build it back, but successfully I built it back. So my love for technology started there. And then later in life, I went to the military. As being from Israel, it's mandatory. I went to intelligence. That's how I started getting myself into the cybersecurity world. Then I lived in a few different places and in Europe. Uh, I wanted to live in those places because I lived in Singapore for really, really quickly, but 3.5 years in Brussels in international school, where I was in a class with people from all over the world, kind of knew that my adult life will not be in Israel, that it's too small for me, and that I want to experience the big world. So after military, I started living in different places and working in those different places. I remember telling myself, I don't want to be a tourist. I want to go to a place, I want to work in a place, immerse myself in the culture, and then with the money that I make, I can travel around. And that's what I did in a few different countries. And then I moved to the US in 2009.
It's a great journey. And I want to ask you a little bit about some of the different places where you lived. And I would say, specifically like the cultural differences that impact business, because I know that there are kind of a lot of, there's differences in how kind of business is conducted and kind of sales and marketing practices. And you must have seen that from kind of living in those environments. But I know you also work with organizations now, or have kind of that passion for working with founders that help kind of with across cultural divides. So tell me a little bit about what are some of those things you experienced, whether general themes or like specific differences by region.
I think every place has a little, not a little actually, it has quite a difference, in culture also, between living in Sweden and Norway and living in England or living in Germany or living in Brussels as a kid or being a year in India was quite the difference. Now, back then, I didn't really have my businesses. I was working for others. So I didn't really pay attention to those cultural business norms. However, I did pay a lot of attention to the actual cultural differences between Scandinavian people to European people, and even within European people, there was quite a difference. Some were more direct, while others were more soft. Some will not look you straight in the eye because it can be seen as rude. So understanding all those cultural norms in each place helped me a lot. And I think for me at least, the best way to learn about a different culture was to go to a place and eat the food. I think food tells a lot about the culture. Because food is about memories, is about who you are and your identity. So I think for me, starting with food, I would go to a
Yeah.
restaurant, eat the food, and I would see how it was plated, what was the flavors, what was the ideation behind the dishes. I'm a foodie, as you can tell by saying what I'm saying. But it really fascinated me seeing those differences in the dishes. And then I remember when I was in Brussels as a kid with people from all over the world, I would go to people's houses and they would have different smells. Smells of usually the food. So back then, as we studied ESL, no one really knew English. I was in a class that we were all kind of aliens talking with our hands. You could see that we can connect on a human level without speaking. So there is a thing to say, okay, there is cultural differences, but in the end of the day, if you strip where we come from, if you strip the things that we've learned, the food that we eat, the music that we listen to, we're still the same humans. We want the same things. We aspire to the same things, being our greater selves, being successful, whatever it may be for that person. So there isn't, in the end of the day, we're one. Language kind of divided us to be different people, but the cultural, in the sense of what we want, what's our goals in life and our aspiration, our purpose, a lot of times it aligns. So if you bring myself Israeli and yourself being from the States, and we'll have two other people here, and we'll start asking, what is the purpose for life? What do you want to do in life? And we'll chunk it up per se. We'll say that it's exactly the same in the end of the day. Most of us, we want to live happy, we want to live purposeful, we want to be whole, we want to have a healthy family. All those are the same. So once I realized that, I said, okay, it doesn't matter which culture I can go to. If I look at somebody's in the same eye level, that we're no better or worse than one another, but we're the same and we likely have the same goals, it was easier for me to connect with any culture. And that's where in my next business of trying to help, that I work a lot with immigrant founders and bringing them. after living in so many different places and having to reinvent myself over and over, I realized that to make a sense of belonging in any place takes, on average, kind of the same things. We want a community. We want to understand where we live. We want to be able to operate in a place that we live fairly with ease, meaning I know how to open a bank account. I know how to go out and which groceries are like the ones that are, or if you're from a different cultures, where are the markets that sells that type of produce that reminds me of home, and how to get by in the work culture and things of that nature. Um, yeah, so that's really how I see cultural differences. And it's hard to speak about like each one. For example, what was different between the Swedish or somebody from Sweden or somebody from India, because then the listeners can take it in a wrong way. So I prefer to not even go into those directions.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally understand that. And I think it is one of those things that it's even hard to articulate and kind of experience over time. But then to your point, right, everyone is an individual person. There's more that's similar than different by and large. And I think as I think about like my world of, sales and marketing and all of that, it's helpful, I'd say, to understand the cultural norms of kind of different regions and what is acceptable, and right, how direct are you in your communications? How much do you kind of overpromise, underpromise in your kind of messaging? But then also remembering that at the end of the day, you're not even just selling to personas, you're selling to individual people, right? And so I think you just articulated that so well around, what do people actually care about as people, and then how does that tie into their, professional lives and their culture and all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So you talked a little bit about kind of getting to present day. I'd love to hear, your startup is in stealth, but anything you can share about kind of what you're working on, or kind of what's conceptually behind what you're working on.
Yeah, conceptually is we want to, and we're going to come out of stealth very soon. So the name of the company will be Borderless, that I can share, because we believe that the world is one place and borders is something that we, myself and my co-founder, don't really love. So we call it Borderless.
I love
And,
that.
and the idea behind it is to help immigrant founders move into the States. How we're going to do it is going that I can't really speak to so much. We're not a relocation service. That's not what we do. Uh, but the idea is how to bring people that are starting their business in the origin country or already just moved here, and what do they need, what things that they're looking at. And it really started from the ideation of myself and my co-founder when we moved here, what it is that we desired mostly. A lot of those things I talked in your earlier question, what it is that we needed, what it is that we could have used to make our life here a bit easier, simpler, more digestible. Because for myself, I came here with $2,000 and a lot of dreams, and I had no idea what I'm doing. I moved to New York. My best friend was living there, so at least I had a roof over my head, sleeping on his couch. But I had no idea what to do. He was just there. He just moved 6 months earlier, so we together didn't know anything about anything. We didn't know how to open a bank account. We didn't know how to meet people. Now I'm a big extrovert, so I started literally going out to bars or events in some ways, or any gatherings that I could get myself into to meet people. I would literally go to bars and I would have a drink for like a few hours, one drink, and just talk to anybody who I can, just to get a little bit of the culture understanding where I am. But it took a long while and I made so many mistakes. So our new company wants to attack those realms. That's what Borderless is for.
Well, I love that. And I can't wait to hear more when you officially launch, having worked with, probably over a dozen or more organizations that are newly focused on the US. I think, there is the personal side, the business side, getting the right plans in place. So lots of moving pieces. So I look forward to hearing more about that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I look forward for our lunch as well. And yeah, my big passion in life is to help others, help others, help others. And that's why I started my coaching business as well, to get people to their desired outcomes. And hopefully by me helping one person, they can help others, they can help others, they can help others, and having like a ripple effect of that. And that's really my life's purpose. And our new company, Borderless, is really an extension of that purpose.
Right. That's wonderful. So, before we wrap up today's conversation, I'd love to ask you, we're talking a lot about leadership and what you've learned along the way. Knowing what you know now, is there any advice that we haven't talked about yet today that you would have given your younger self in your first ever leadership role?
If there was one advice, just one, because I can think of so many, but one advice that I could give my younger self was listen, really listen. That would have helped me a lot in the beginning. Just really listen, pay attention, the power of listening. I think it all starts from there.
Well said. Well said. Well, thank you for that. And if people want to reach out and get in touch with you, how can they contact you?
They can contact me through LinkedIn or my personal website, liorklisman.com. And those will be the two best ways to contact me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Lior. I really appreciate so much of what you shared. Really great to have you on the podcast.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you to everybody that's listening. I know I loved hearing about so much of what Lior shared from his personal experience and how that impacted the organizations that he led. And so if today gave you or listeners any valuable insights, and I am sure that it did, please share this with someone. Spreading this kind of knowledge and information helps all of us grow as leaders and helps us drive successful transformation for ourselves and for our organizations. So thanks again, Lior. And this has been another great episode of Shift and Thrive. See you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.